I see reality breaking down all my fantasies. It would be nice if I at least had one fantasy. That neutrality about to take a terabyte from the American apple pie, better get a slice. It's kinda scary the way that this life is moving on. Marvin's doing backflips inside his grave, what's going on? We have head-on collisions, not seeing another's vision. Maybe that's the reason why some colors fit the description. A lot of relationships need life raps. Ships. I guess you just can't have only one like potato chips. I would love for you to listen with an open heart, but would you really even hear me if it's torn apart? I don't do the things that I used to. I'll be fine even if I lose you, okay? Yeah. Okay.
Peace and blessings, family. My name is asarimhotep, and I am with the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology, as well as the popular YouTube channel Mbongi. I am an Africologist and computer scientist out of Houston, Texas, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I have spent the last 20 years researching the connections between ancient Kemet, that is modern Egypt, and modern Bantu-speaking cultures of Central and Southern Africa. Throughout this 20-year journey, I've examined all the relevant literature in numerous languages, collected paleontological as well as archaeological data from across millennia. I have presented hypotheses and abandoned hypotheses, come to conclusions and abandoned conclusions, reviewed arguments for and against known hypotheses, and analyzed frameworks that sought to define and characterize the vast array of African experiences. After over 20 years of asking critical questions of history, of philosophy, religion, and culture, I have finally gotten to the point where I have complete and total faith in the results of our research. I say our research because I am one of among a number of scholars who have either laid the foundations in classical Africology or are continuing to expand and develop more robust research on this connection between ancient Egyptian and Bantu civilizations. After spending so much time behind the computer and in the libraries and in the museums for over 20 years, I believe it is time to go out and to touch the living artifacts and engage with the people involved in the research whose stories we have been telling all this time, which brings us to why we are here today. Although I have written and will continue to write about the results of my research, my goal now is to summarize this data and present it in documentary film form. I have decided to put some of that computer science as well as new media experience together to creatively tell this important aspect of African history that many may not be aware of. The title of the film is China Intu, Ancient Kemet and the Intu Universe, and we are currently raising funds for the first phase of our journey. In February of 2022, I will be joining the crew of the award-winning documentary film Hapi, The Role of Economics on the Development of Civilization, for a very important Returning to the Source tour and conference in Egypt, which we know is in Northeast Africa. And while I am there, I will be shooting parts of our film China Intu and gathering footage for a proof of concept trailer, which will be used for greater fundraising efforts in the near future. And this is where you come in. I am currently trying to raise $5,000 to help with location expenses, equipment rentals, insurance, and the like, so that we can get some great shots for some primary as well as B-roll footage. When we return from Egypt, some of this footage will be combined with some preliminary interviews to compile a unique trailer to give the audience and potential investors a glimpse of the vision and potential of the film. Our ultimate goal is to travel to places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Zimbabwe, Uganda, and South Africa for the first film. And did I forget to mention that we intend for this to be a series of documentary films? Therefore, subsequent films will require us to travel to places like Cameroon, Nigeria, Ghana, and Senegal, as well as Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia. We have big goals, and with your help, we can make this happen. And if you're interested in donating to this film project, please visit our website at www.chinaintufilm.com, where you can leave a donation. There are other ways you can donate as well, which includes joining our Patreon page, donating through CashApp, or donating live when we're doing a live show on YouTube. And the YouTube channel has over 6,000 subscribers, and Facebook has over 5,000 subscribers as well. And with a minimum donation of like $5 each, we can quickly reach our goal. You can spread the word of our efforts by sharing this video with friends and colleagues, as well as liking it. We appreciate your help, and all donors will be given credit on the website, as well as at the end of the film during the credits. We thank you from the bottom of our heart to those who have given generously already, and we look forward to bringing this important film to the public. Hotep. Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother, asarimhotep, with the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology. And today is Friday, January the 21st, 2022. And I am bringing part 2 of our conversation on, or I should say titled, Towards a Meaning of Yahweh, part 2. So now we're going to deal with Yahweh in West Africa. And so if you followed us from the first video, I provided some evidence to suggest that the popular Hebrew or Israelite deity known as Yahweh is actually a borrowing from the ancient Egyptians. And I would encourage everyone, if you have not seen that video, to please watch it. It is on the YouTube channel. And so, a lot of this will make more sense, after you have watched the first video. So the discourse for today will be supplementary in that initial argument. And then, of course, I will be adding some new arguments. And this is just part of a larger project. And, I've been working on this for a number of years, about 12 or 13 years, because some of this research was originally a part of the book on the meaning of Kemet, and it kind of veered off in its own direction. And I initially abandoned that project, but starting a new one with this. So y'all hold tight, and I will be back, with the presentation, but I just want to make a few announcements first. So if you have not registered for the Ancient Nubian and Egyptian Connections with the Niger Valley and the Atlantic World Conference, please visit westafricabeyond.org. It is going to be held on February the 15th through the 16th, 2022. And there are a number of very powerful scholars who will be presenting on this conference. Let me see. Let me just name a few. And I was going to post it, but it would be too small for y'all to see. But we have Dr. Abdul Salau from Tuskegee University, originally from Nigeria. He's going to be talking about ancient Egyptian origin of Yoruba social and moral order. And, there's Dr. Ives Ngone, who's going to be talking about the ancient Nile Valley civilization's impact on Southeast Asia, architectural evidence in Thailand and Cambodia. We had Doctors Salam Faraji and Dr. Jahi Issa. They are the ones who are putting on the program. And Dr. Faraji will be speaking on ancestral shrines and earthen pyramids, exploring the links between ancient Nubia and West Africa. Dr. Jahi Issa will be talking about brand Nubians, Egyptian Nubian culture in the Americas via the transatlantic slave trade, 1808 to 1860. We have two PhD candidates who will be presenting as well. Anissa Malvosin. Um, her presentation is titled At the Edge of the Sahara, Decorative Style Between Egypt, Nubia, and West African Regions. Then we have Lamine Baji from Sheikh Anta Diop University. And I should have mentioned Miss Malvoisin is from the University of Toronto. And so Brother Baji will be talking about the Baobab cemeteries, or Baobab with griot. They look at an atypical funeral practice in Senegambia. We have Dr. Andrew Jaggs, Between the Nile and Niger, exploring ritual affinities between the Yoruba and ancient Nubia and Egypt. We had him on the program before. Our good brother Reggie out of New York will be there presenting. His title is Rethinking the Continuity of African People by Understanding the Parent Peoples of Ancient Egypt, Central and West Africa. We have Dr. Sandro Capocici from the University of Paris. Essay on the function of historical Nigerian ram-headed Agides or Agides. I don't know how you pronounce that word. He'll correct me. We got Dr. Oman Digi in the building from the University of Yaoundé in Cameroon. He talks about the Egyptian god Bes, alias Bassa, and the myth of the divine origin of the Bassa of Cameroon, revelation of an unsuspected plural kinship of the Egyptian, Nubian, and Bantu civilizations, and as well as Dr. Shamarka Keita, Ancient Egypt and its origins, geography, language, archaeology, human biology. And it's just going to be a powerful, powerful conference. So y'all can visit West Africa and beyond.org. This is the link. I don't have the link up here. That's a shame, but it should be West Africa and beyond.org. And that's where you'll be able to register. So it's $35 per day. And the schedule should be posted up soon. And then after that, on the 18th, we will be in Egypt. And, for another powerful tour and conference. I will be a part of that as well. Or I forgot to mention that I'm a part of that Nubian Connections online conference. And I'll also be a part of this Aket Tours Returning to the Source conference that's going to be in Aswan, Egypt, on the 25th and 26th of February. But the tour starts on the 18th. So I have that conference on the 16th, and 2 days later, I'll be on my way to Egypt. And along with Professor James Smalls, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Brother Anthony Browder, Dr. Solange Ashby, Dr. Rosalind Jeffries, Dr. Wade Nobles and his wife, Dr. Vera Nobles, Infudishi Jehudi Mess, as well as Dr. Theophile Obenga, who will be in the building. And so you can find out more about that at akettours.com. So without further ado, I want to thank each and every single one of you who are listening to this in the archive. And then, of course, love and light to each and every one of you who are listening live. So I don't want to take up too much of your time and just want to get right into it. So what I'm going to do is let's remove that real quick, and I'm going to share my screen. So let's do that. And we will start from the beginning. And I sound very country at this moment. So I've titled this presentation again, Towards an Etymology of Yahweh. If you're a Black Hebrew Israelite, you'd be like Yahweh. And then, you talk about Jesus, you'll say Yahweh Shai, or others will say Yeshua. So this is part 2. And the focus is actually going to be Yahweh among the Yoruba. And so this is going to be a very important connection between ancient Kemet, of course, and the Levant and West Africa. So this is not a case of the people from the Levant going in and dropping off Yahweh. As you will see later on in this discussion, this is inherited. This is the cognate for the term, and you will see that this is an indigenous to the Yoruba people and West Africa. And so, as I mentioned before, this research project, started some 13 years ago when I was writing a book titled Ogun and the Meaning of Kemet. And I abandoned the project because the research, forced me to go into a different direction on the etymology of the word Kemet. But a lot of that research that was viable, I kept and expanded, and parts of it became some of the books that um, I released since that time. So, since this is part two, and I'm not going to assume that everyone who is listening now was able to view the first video. So, and even those who did, we're just going to have a quick recap. And so, I want to make sure that, y'all understand a few key terms and considerations. And so, firstly, want to introduce the word paronymy. And so paronymy is a word that is linked to another by similarity of form. That is to say that, A or one, the common usage of words which are almost homonyms but have slight differences in spelling and have differences in meanings. Or two, words having a similar sound but different orthography and different meanings. For example, English all and all. And so, we come to discover through the process of paronymy that the deity known as Yahweh amongst the Israelites um took on a lot of attributes, and that was the result of similar words that sounded the same, and they were all synthesized and combined to give us the deity by the name of Yahweh. And so we'll kind of re-emphasize that. And then I told y'all to highlight and to jot down a few words. And so just to keep these synthesis of ideas in your mind throughout the presentation. So, a few vocabulary words. I want you to make sure that y'all write down the words fire, write down the word sun, light, volcano, destruction, violence, and storms. And so these are all of the characteristics that you will find, in regards to Yahweh. And thirdly, there's a what we call a consanguinity. That means a common shared essence between three primary deities. That is Seth of ancient Egypt, that is Baal of Canaan, and then Yahweh of Israel. And so all of these deities are connected in very literal and conceptual ways. And so, lastly, the representation of Yahweh, as a warrior, deity, who's also, the personification of violent storms and volcanoes. And so, those are a few things that we highlighted in the last presentation. And so, we're in this presentation, we're building off of what we discussed the last time, which was just like 2 days ago. So again, Yahweh, this is how you would write Yahweh in the Hebrew script, which is just a variation of the ancient Egyptian script. Because, of course, Yahweh couldn't invent his own script, so he had to borrow, uh, or the Canaanites in general, and they just borrowed the Canaanite script. But the this is ultimately the ancient Egyptian script. So Yahweh had to borrow uh, the ancient Egyptian script. And it's not surprising because Yahweh is an Egyptian deity. So, of course, he would be familiar with the ancient Egyptian script. But, what I have here at the top is, one citation from Exodus 13, verse 21. And this is when the Israelites are coming out of Egypt after allegedly being enslaved for 400 plus years. So the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud and by night in a pillar of fire. And so what we argue here and what many scholars have argued is that Yahweh is the personification of a volcano and all of the violent activities from an erupting volcano. So, when it talks about a pillar of fire, it is an erupting. This is what a pillar is: a vertical, uh, standing beam. And so you see this vertical dark cloud that you would see by day, but at night it would look like a pillar of fire. And of course, there's lightning and storms that happen as a result of the gas and chemical composition of the exploding volcano in the area. And so, of course, volcanoes are on the edge of tectonic plates, and they can cause tsunamis, which cause devastating floods and damage. And so there's all kinds of things that can happen as a result of earthquakes, of exploding volcanoes, and the like. And so all of these things were personified as being first a local deity, and then among the Hebrews it became the supreme deity. So we also discussed the relationship between the word Yahweh and Zeus, and so I want to elaborate on that linguistically some more in the future. But ultimately, these of course artist renditions of these deities. So someone drew on the right, this is supposed to be Yahweh or Yahweh, and of course he is the black version of Zeus. And but in reality, they're one and the same. And so what a lot of Hebrew Israelites don't realize is that the Judaic and Christian religion are just normal, quote unquote, pagan religions, and they have personified geological phenomena and made them deities. I'll have to do a uh, a video on how Adam and Eve is like sky and earth, and but they so-called demythalize a lot of the deities because of their particular philosophy of monotheism. But Yahweh is just the Hebrews version of Zeus on Mount Olympus, except he's usually on Mount Sinai. And so now we can kind of get into the bulk of the conversation here. And so I introduced a lot of text in the last conversation, but in this one I want to introduce, this one is called The Invention of God by Thomas Romer. And in this text the author is concerned with the invention and the origin of the God Yahweh. And so, it's a very good text to read. I encourage those who are interested to read this text. And so on pages 2 and 3, he reminds us of something that we should keep in the back of our minds, or I should say the forefront of our minds, as we're going along with this conversation. So he says, an examination of this documentation allows us to retrace the path of a God who probably had his origin somewhere in the south between the Negev and Egypt. Originally, he was a god of the wilderness, of war and storms, but gradually, through a series of small steps, he became the god of Israel and Jerusalem. This is the only way to trace the career of a desert god who was originally venerated by groups of nomads. which is very important, which is why I have it highlighted, and eventually became the God with the unpronounceable name of the Hebrew Bible. And so, what scholars, and he's a biblical scholar, and so when it's different when you're reading academic texts, that does textual analysis and criticism and comparisons and archaeology and things like that, versus you know folks who have the spirit and decide to start preaching. And your Hebrew Israelites are part of the latter bunch. There's not a scholar among them, and so they're just in. It's just a lot of bias and self confirmations when it comes to a lot of their teachings. And remember that I used to be one, and so I'm very familiar with the doctrine. And uh so a lot of this stuff will fall on deaf ears because they cannot believe that you know uh Yahweh, the main deity, the main one God, is in fact a volcano god. And and much of the Semitic concepts of God derives from Egypt anyway. And in my book Aluja Volume 2, I demonstrate where even El, Allah comes from Egypt. And but more so in more ancient times, in terms of Proto-Semitic times, it's still a borrowing from the ancient Egyptian language. So we continue. So we understand here again that Yahweh is a God of the wilderness, of war and storms. He's a desert god, and he was venerated by groups of nomads, people who were in and out of places and who roam long distances. So now we're going to get into the so-called meaning of the name as proposed by the author. So this is the same text, and so but on page 34. So I'll read. He says, so the tetragrammaton, the YHWH, might be connected to the Southern Semitic root HWY, which has three possible meanings: to desire, to fall, and to blow. The two meanings, desire and fall, are found in biblical Hebrew, but blow is not documented. It is conceivable that the reason for this is precisely a desire to avoid a form that would be too close to the divine name. As the great biblical scholar Julius Wellhausen noted, as early as the end of the 19th century, the meaning blow would be especially appropriate for a storm god. And then there's some uh, German there, which translates as he flies through the air, he blows. Given our current state of knowledge, this explanation is probably the most satisfactory, even though it is not totally without difficulties. Yahweh then would be he who blows, he who brings the wind, a god of storms, who might also have certain characteristics of a warrior and a desert god. This would accord rather well, as we shall see, with the primitive functions of Yahweh. So what they're doing here is trying to look for a Semitic root that explains the characteristics of Yahweh. And so there's this triconsonantal root, HWY, because they argue that the Y in Yahweh is a prefix, that there's a root here meaning to desire, to fall, like to stumble and things, and then to blow. And so what I noted in the first conversation is that the word Yahweh is actually an epithet, another name for both Set, the god Set, and the god Apep, known as Apophis. And so you will see it written in this form here: J, which is like a Y sound, a semi-vowel, and then a dotted H with a double Y or double I here. And so it is a root dealing with to darken of the skies, And we can see here the sky with the lightning bolt. And so what they're talking about is storms, because the god Set, which you see a representation of on the left, is a nomadic pastoralist god. So this is why it's important to pay attention to the phrase dealing with Yahweh being the god of roaming nomads. See, his group is venerated, this is the only way to trace the career of a desert god who was originally venerated by groups of nomads. And um, so this is, and we can get even deeper in another discussion just on Set alone and his relationship, in Egypt, and the fluctuating, value that he has. But this is, the Patreon of the nomadic pastoralist, and so for the settled Egyptians, it was a love-hate relationship because he had a warrior spirit, and so he was also, the deity of the warriors. But because of the chaos and the attitudes and the values of Set, he was also, you know looked upon badly in many respects. And sometimes you would see his hieroglyph, next to diseases, next to words for destruction, et cetera, et cetera. So, but notice, as I also mentioned, the Y and the W sounds in Egyptian interchange. And so we have here at the bottom this word huyet, meaning flood of the Nile and rain. And then we have huyet here, meaning to blow and impact injury. And so this very word that he's trying to argue here, that they don't have evidence for in the Hebrew Bible, exists amongst the ancient Egyptians in this word here, and an impact injury. So that's why the word to fall is there. And this word here, desire, because it's linked to the word meaning angry in it and stuff. So we'll get to that in a bit. But so now you can understand, because of paronymy, how the word for flood and rain and ultimately storm, and the word for blow and impact injury, is combined with this word here meaning to darken of the sky. And of course these attributes being associated with the deity, the Necher Set, or Setek. And so the main characteristics of Set, as is discussed in the text that we were citing, is aggressive behavior, weather disturbances, and uproariness. And so everything dealing with chaos, instability, damage, war, hatred, malice, pettiness, all are associated with the deity Set, who his other name is Yahweh or Yahoo, which we'll get into. And so, and we also cited another text, Yahweh before Israel, glimpse of history in a divine name. And so in this text, the author, Dr. Daniel E. Fleming, is trying to make an argument for the earliest. He's starting from the earliest mention of the word Yahweh, which is actually in ancient Egypt, but is referring to a people who by this time, they're named after the deity itself. And so that's the function of this particular book. So he doesn't really try to make a linguistic argument. He's focused on that area of study. But in the text, he mentions the following. He says, Lewis citation reviews the question in some detail, concluding that the consensus of scholarship is certainly correct that Yahweh represents a verbal form, with the Y representing the third masculine singular verbal prefix of the verb hya, meaning to be. The first point of evidence for Lewis is Exodus 3 and 14. Note the recent proposal by Drewel 2020 to seek a different verb, hui, as to destroy. And so what ultimately, he comes to the conclusion in this and other scholars is that when you read Exodus 3 and 14, the Israelites are attempting to try to define the word Yahweh, but they can't because it's not a Hebrew word, it's not a Canaanite word. So it's folk etymology. And all throughout the biblical text, it's just known for folk etymology. Folk etymology is, just popular etymology. It's not done as a result of a deep and serious linguistic analysis where they're comparing two or more languages. They're recording the patterns of the sound, the regular sound meaning correspondences, in terms of basic vocabulary and grammar and morphology. They're doing none of that. Whatever sounds right in their head, that's what they choose in terms of the meaning. There's just all kinds of examples of this. And matter of fact, Mondupe Oduyoye in this book here, if y'all can see it, Words and Meaning in the Yoruba Religion, Linguistic Connections in Yoruba, Ancient Egyptian, and Semitic. Like the very first chapter is dedicated to, or I should say, the intro is dedicated to folk etymology, and he gives a lot of good examples in his own native language among the Yoruba people and how they, can go wild with folk etymology, and the same thing for the Hebrew Israelites. So keep that in mind. So this hui here, to destroy, would be in concert with this word here, huyet, or huyit, or hawayit, meaning to blow or an impact injury. And so it's all within that same semantic field. So we also noted that the root of the forms that we argue is the root for Yahweh or Yahweh, however you want to pronounce it, derives from an ancient Egyptian root, ch, meaning ultimately it's ke, meaning the sound, from an onomatopoeia word, meaning the sound of dry wood being cut, the sound of crackling a branch, and then in combination, it becomes a word for fire and sun. And then this word het here, which means like a thing. It can also mean a tree branch or a stick. And then, of course, you use sticks to make fire. And so this also becomes the word, doubles the word for fire or to burn on the body. But then it's suffixed by the M morpheme. The ancient Egyptian language is a monosyllabic language, a consonant vowel monosyllabic language that builds off of these consonant vowel roots and morphemes. So the h sound that is suffixed by t in this form is now hem or hem, meaning warm, dry, and hot. But then when it's suffixed with this grapheme here, it is a word meaning to demolish buildings, to dig up the earth, harm someone, debar from, exclude, attack an enemy. Then when it's suffixed by W, you see to demolish buildings, another variation. Another form with a different W, which is an agent suffix, means stone breaker. He who breaks stones, he who is a demolition worker, right? And then Himayet, a female evil entity, a demoness destroyer. All of this derives from a root meaning fire, because fire, consumes, it destroys, it damages, of course, it burns, but it also produces light and things of that nature. So the word formation process in Egyptian is a consonant vowel single root that has other consonant vowel morphemes that are agglutinated to the root, which gives us deeper meanings. So that's what we see here. And so we see the same thing even in Semitic for this root. So a root hem hot, and I'm taking this from the PhD dissertation, A Biradical Origin of Semitic Roots. And this is very important because the Semitic language is primarily known for its triconsonantal roots. And so it creates a skeleton of consonant roots, and then it changes the vowels to give fluctuations in meaning. And so this what she's arguing is that these triconsonantal roots derive from biconsonantal or biradical roots. And there's lots of support for this. And because especially when we compare Semitic words with other African words, they the inter-African correspondences are all consonant vowel, or consonant vowel consonant. Whereas they have the triradical form. And so we see here that there's a semantic evolution from this concept of hot, and then when the third radical is added, you have forms like Hamas, zeal, Hammam, spa, hot bath, but Hamasha, enrage, infuriate, Huma, fever, Humir, red, bloody, excited, Humam, lava, embers, Tahumus, fanaticism, Hamaza, burn the tongue while tasting. And in variations in Hebrew, we see here it has words meaning to desire, become inflamed, agitated, be ruthless, to be hot with anger or desire, conceive, to do violence. So when you understand that, that's why when we go back here and he said hui, because it even in Semitic, the M and W sounds interchange, just like in Egyptian and other African languages. It's just a common phonetic interchange. And so to desire and to fall and to blow, how all of these terms, even related, that is because of the semantic expansion from a root meaning fire, and hot, into bird. And then of course these are all the derivative forms of the root. And so in The Invention of God, Dr. Romer, argues or makes the argument that the word Yahweh or Yahweh or Yahweh uh, is more anciently pronounced Yahoo or Yahoo, and not Yahoo like the email service, but Yahoo. And so he says, on the other hand, it does seem clear that the original pronunciation of Yahweh was Yahoo or Yahoo, where then does the pronunciation Yahweh, where then does the pronunciation Yahweh, which is particularly strongly represented in texts of the fathers of the church, come from? And so what he's arguing is that Yahweh is a later form, and that the root is just simply Yahoo or Yahoo, which there is some support from that. But again, he's still trying to explain it through Semitic, and so he doesn't even go into details. He doesn't even look at ancient Egyptian, but he recognizes that there's a strong tie with Egypt regarding Yahweh. And so, this is Dr. Yoshiyuki Wuchiki, who wrote the book Egyptian Proper Names and Loanwords in Northwest Semitic. And, he provides you an array of Semitic names that are not Semitic. They were all are borrowed from the ancient Egyptian language. This tells you a lot because it's telling you where the influence and the power dynamic, where this resided. It resided with Egypt. Egypt is the one that had all the influence. So you're going to see an introduction in a flux of ancient Egyptian concepts in the culture, in the language, in the religion. And so what we're saying here that this is no different, that what you're detecting even in the names is a result of the influence of the Egyptians in the Levant. And remember that in pre-dynastic times, Egypt had colonies in the Levant, and later on, uh, the Levant, Palestine, Canaan, all of that was ruled by Egypt. And so, of course, they had their soldiers and things there. So, the ancient Egyptians brought aspects of their culture and language with them, and it became ingrained, it became integrated with the cultures that resided there, who were under the tutelage of the ancient Egyptians. Excuse me there. So I'm bringing this out to show that when you see an ancient Egyptian, and I think I may start doing the full screen now, just to make sure that y'all see everything. So that should be good. Just in case you're on small devices. And so when you see when we transliterate it using the letter J in Egyptian, it corresponds in Semitic with the glottal stop or the Y sound. And the semi-vowels Y and W in Egyptian also corresponds with Y and W in Semitic. And so, especially in a lot of the loan words from Egyptian to Semitic, you'll see it played out that way. And so this book, gives a good and full breakdown of that. So, so when you're seeing Yahweh, these are the correspondences, and even the dotted H's and things of that nature. So, when you're talking about a native form of Yahweh, this is or Yahoo, Yahoo, what these are the roots here that give us that form. And so what I am essentially arguing is for this progression. So this is how we get the so-called tetragrammaton variation and the forms that we see in ancient Kemet. So there was a great palatalization. There was a series of palatalizations that happened in Egypt, which is and this is a linguistic function that I'm talking about, which is beyond the scope of our current conversation, but that the K sound, when followed by one of the palatal vowels, gave way to these forms here. We have ch in him, and then we have sh and shim. But the K actually gave birth to 4 types of H's in the language, or they correspond with 4 different types of H's in the language. So you'll see the H written with this loop under it, and then you'll see a H written with the dot, and then you'll see the H written with the underline, and then just a regular, voiceless glottal fricative, the H here, right? And so we won't deal too much with the H with the underline H, in M sequence, but just know that we on a regular can correspond to K to that sound as well. And these sounds interchange with each other, or they in later times they morph into each other, or they're replaced by each other. And so, as I mentioned in the previous video, and I'm re-emphasize this now, the M as in Mary interchanges with W. And that's because the M will turn into W in the intervocalic position. So, like we have here, when it's doubled up, for example. So you have, the dotted HM, which will become dotted HW, and oftentimes that last semi-vowel will drop. So this is how you have HWH, or the dotted HWH. And it's the same thing when you have the HW just with the regular H. It's going to be HM, HM. And actually, and I don't know why I did that, but it should be HW, HW here in the center, and then HWH. And then we get these forms because the J that you see here, which is like, I or Y, is a prefix on this root. And so the W and Y's also interchange, which we'll see an example of a little later. So keep this in mind when you're looking at the progress, and excuse my error in, where the mouse is circulating here. The M should be a W. So I'm trying to show the progression of these formats. So this is how you get the forms that ultimately become Yahweh, the tetragrammaton in Semitic. And so that same root that becomes him, dealing with fire, also then becomes a word for light when it transforms into the dotted HW, and it becomes shimmering light with a few suffixes here, shimmering light and shining light. But when it's prefixed with the J sound, this is how we get the word Jehuti or Tehuti, or the god Tho, who is, the god of mathematics and education, and also is personified as the moon. And so words for moon in many world languages derive simply as a word for light. So it'll be like a diminutive light. So now, what we came here for. So that was the review. And now we're going to get into the meat here. So when I say that Yahweh exists amongst the Yoruba, it is, we're not saying that you're going to find the form Yahweh in among the Yoruba language. You're going to find it in closer to its original form, like you would find it in ancient Egypt. And so my proposal here is the following: that the Hebrew Yahweh is cognate with the Yoruba Ogun, who is the patron saint of blacksmiths. Both deities are associated with violence, war, and destruction. And lastly, their historical relationship adds clarity to the conception of another ancient Egyptian deity. So we're going to see that there's an inherited, amongst the ancient Egyptians, form of Yahweh, which is Set. And then we have amongst the Yoruba their own form of the deity, which is Ogun. And then there's going to be a second variation of the form in Egyptian. And then that deity is actually moves and makes its way into West Africa, in Nigeria and Benin, as a different deity, which those of you who are familiar with the Yoruba religious tradition will recognize this, these dots and the importance of these dots on these initiates here. And so you have a clue of who we're going to be dealing with, later on. And so the question now is, who is Ogun? And so I'll be mainly drawing, from my own experience in the tradition, as well as some academic work. So from the academic side, this is a good book to draw from. This is Africa's Ogun. The second edition, Old World and New, is edited by Dr. Sandra T. Barnes. And there's a number of scholars who have contributed to this, which discusses the array of characteristics and origin stories and the like, of the Ogun cult among the Yoruba. And so, on page 107, the author, when describing the some of the primary characteristics of Ogun, states that Ogun represents war, violence, and destruction. These are key words that are going to just keep coming up when we're talking about these deities, whether it's Ogun, whether it is Yahweh, whether it is Seth or Baal. All of them have these characteristics. And and then on page 2, Dr. Barnes notes that when it comes to Ogun, there are two aspects primarily of Ogun. And one, as a violent warrior, fully armed and laden with frightening charms and medicines to kill his foes. And two, as a leader known for his sexual prowess, who nurtures, protects, and relentlessly pursues truth, equity, and justice. And so he, again, this association with violence. Remember that he is the patron saint of blacksmiths and metallurgists, and of course, they're the ones who create the weapons of war. And he's also associated just with technology in general. And so there's a wide range of derived associations as a result of Ogun's association being a personification of metallurgy and the development of the instruments of war, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm going to show you that even within the Yoruba language, that there is two or three forms of the word or the root goon in the language. And so what we're going to discover here is that, Ogun, the god of iron, war, and hunting, there's a semantic, what we call semantic slippage and variation when there's a correspondence with another phoneme or phone in the language. So you can see here where on the Yoruba side, so we see the table here is there's a total of 5 columns. In the center is the ancient Egyptian, which I call Chikam. But on the left, we have the form of the Yoruba language, GN. But on the second column, we have KN. So G and K are both velar sounds. So one is voiced, g, 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 ag, and then we have K, the voiceless velar sound, k, 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 right? And so what we're going to see is that both the G and the K sound in Yoruba language corresponds to the dotted H in ancient Egyptian. And then the N as in Nancy corresponds to M as in Mary in the N as in Nancy in Yoruba corresponds to the M as in Mary in Egyptian. But notice this fourth column over here. We'll see another sound variation, but with an R sound. So we have G, K, and R corresponding internally within the Yoruba language. And so when we talk about the god of iron and war and hunting, then you have in the second column Akin, bravery, brave, valor, Okun, strength, Akoni, brave person, a hero. And in Egyptian, we have Mehu or Mehawu, a hunter, a fish spearer. Notice that the syllables are switched in Egyptian. And so dialectical variation when it's switched in the original position, we have himi to drive back or to repel, or him to strike, or hamez to slay, to mutilate. And then we have rune to consume, to tarpate, to destroy, annihilate, exterminate, extinct, irunu, indignation, anger, emotion, wrath, and rage. And so we have Ogun, god of iron. And then we have in Egyptian, Hemet, copper, and Hemwit, as craftsman. And then we have even Kemet, a metal and iron. And then in Yoruba we have Irin, iron, nail, metal, etc. Ogun, 20. And then we have Kun, to be full. And then Meh, to be full, to fill. And remember that there's also a Kim variant, meaning to be full, complete. So and then ran in Egyptian, entirely, totally, altogether. So the underlying thing is completeness, to be full. And so it manifests itself in Ogun form as the number 20, but in the root kun just means to be full. But when it's ran, it's entirely, totality, or totally and altogether. And so you see how this plays out. And so we do this all day. Where there's GN in Yoruba, it has a different semantic variation in a KN form, but it always corresponds to dotted HM in Egyptian and RN in Yoruba again. And so you can, when you come back to review this, you can look at this, and this, for those of you who have Aluja Volume 2, this is in Aluja Volume 2, Chapter 10. So, but I wanted to pay attention to this last row here. This is going to be very important a little later on in our discussion. So we have Ologini, cat, and then Ekun, tiger, cat family, leopard, Kininuan, lion, cat family. And then we have Hemet, and it's defined in the dictionary as quote unquote an animal, but you see the cat determinative. So this is why I included the glyph here. It has a cat determinative. And then we have Iran, meat, flesh, beast, animal, Irin, elephant, Irin, me, hippopotamus. Well, it's ultimately simply a word for beast, or dangerous animal. So keep this in mind. And so there's a reason why I'm showing the GN consonant sequence and the RN consonant sequence. I'm building up the case here, and it's all going to come together a little later. And so what we have here, what I'm showing, is that where the Yoruba has GN, it corresponds, we just saw one series of correspondences with the dotted HM. But you notice here I have them, all the different variations, because all of these interchange with each other. We're going to show, and I'm going to show, how these all relate. And so, of course, the dotted HM becomes .HW, and the regular HM becomes HW, and this is how you get these forms here. So when you're talking about, Ogun, in the Egyptian language, it goes through these variations. And because this word Ogun also derives from a root meaning fire. And that's how it become the words for metallurgists and violence and war, just like what we saw in Egyptian, just like what we saw in Semitic. So when you understand the correspondences here and the interchanges, you can see how the dotted H, who, becomes Ihu, Ihi, and who here in Yahu, Yahi, or Yahui. And remember that M and W, which I have over here in the right-hand corner at the bottom, interchanges in Egyptian and Semitic. So, when you come back, make sure that you look at this and understand this display here, because all of this, comes together nicely. So when you see in Egyptian dotted H, WI, and dotted HY, these interchange, these are different forms of the same word, meaning to beat, to strike, to smite, clap, thresh, repress. or HW dot, soldier, combatant, beaten. This is all Ogun. These are cognates for the word Ogun. And so, what's interesting about this form here, this dotted HW, is soldier, combatant, beater, herdsman. Because remember, in ancient Egypt, the quote unquote army were just nomadic pastoralists because they were known for being warriors. Whether you're talking about the Magi, whether you're talking about the ancestors to the collagen people, or whoever, the Afar, all of these people were brought into the military because the nomadic pastoralists are known for being warriors and fighters. And so on the left hand side you have a Fulani, a Wodabi Fulani, and so so we go below. So remember that the concept of paronymy and how the similarities in words and meanings are synthesized and personified as deities in the ancient world, and in ancient Egypt is no different. So there's a reason why Set, under the title of Yahweh or Yahoo or Yahoo or Yahoo, however you want to pronounce it, has the characteristics of someone who is constantly fighting and at war and angry, and is a soldier, and is the god of storms and floods, because dotted HY, flood. But notice this form here, dotted HW, dotted HW, is what we call in linguistics a reduplication. So as I mentioned earlier, Y and W interchange in Egyptian. And so this is the same word for flood. So hope all of this is coming together. So here's some early artwork of the nomadic pastoralist. So you notice when Set is holding the wasp scepter, that's right here. In the Yoruba language, you pronounce this Ashe. Ashe is the staff of authority, and it corresponds to the word wasp. And so for those of you who have my text, you're Chiluba Maweja, Yoruba Orisha, and ancient Egyptian Ak. I give the proof in that text as well. And so you see these nomadic pastoralists in the Sahara 6,000 to 7,000 years ago, and you see it in the artwork in here. So here's from Wadi Kash, Upper Egyptian rule with the red crown. You see the red crown here, 4,000 BC. And so you see the wasp scepter. These are nomadic pastoralists here. You see the wasp scepter in their hands, depicted on this early artwork. And so this is from Hyrcanopolis, tomb 100, 3500 BCE. Again, you see the wasp scepter in this primitive art, so-called, before the first dynasty. And so there's continuities here. Y'all gotta excuse me. So, Dr. Modupe Oduyoye, has made an argument that, your Fulani have been traveling back and forth throughout North Africa and West Africa, for thousands of years. And we have, proof of this, and they're known by many names. The Fulbe, Abore, Bororo, Fula, Pulo, the Hapiru of ancient Egypt, Abiri, Apirum, Apiru, going all the way back and forth, migrating with the herds and things in North Africa, India, and ancient Egypt. And so this is how a lot of the some of these ideas have spread, as they have been absorbed and have absorbed other groups as they have migrated throughout the years. And so what's also interesting is that HW dot is the word for the Sphinx. Some of y'all may know the Sphinx as the Harem Akhet, or Heru on the horizon. And but the other name for the Sphinx is Ogun. This is a picture of Ogun back in the day. Remember I told y'all, remember I said to pay attention to this Ogini cat and Ekun tiger, cat, leopard, Keniniun lion, cat family. And then Hemet, an animal here with the cat determinative that you see over here. This is not coincidence. So remember, M and W interchange in Egyptian. So this Hemet now is in the M is in an intervocalic position. So now the M turns into W. And when it does that, it becomes the word for Sphinx, the Harem Akhet. So this is Ogun, Ekun, Sphinx. And so you see here the determinative of the lying, the lying down. He's in a war stance, like he's getting ready to pounce. And so you see these connections. And it's possible that the Sphinx is also connected with water as well, via paronymy. And so that's a hypothesis that I'm currently, trying to look into, because this whole complex is connected to the river, and I believe some of it, was channeled through here through the pyramids itself and things. But Ogun, the conceptual and logical cognate for Ogun is I don't even know how you would pronounce this, Hui, Hu, or whatever, but it's the Sphinx, right? And so this is why it's important to have historical comparative linguistics as one of your tools in your arsenal when doing historical analysis. And so this is one of the steles, at the bottom of the Sphinx. And so again, some have argued that these are like water channels underneath, and some people have said that there's like a pathway underneath, and it was flooded even at one point. And I wish I had my books with me. They're in Philly, and so I have some texts that discuss that. So I won't make any speculation now, because I don't have my source material and to analyze it. But getting back to Ogun in the Yoruba tradition. So this is Dr. Modupe Oduyoye again. I had the opportunity to interview him this past summer, so you can check the interview on the channel. And he is the author as well of Words and Meaning in Yoruba Religion, Linguistic Connections Between Semitic, Ancient Egyptian, and Yoruba. And he is a Yale-educated linguist and theologian, and has been doing some very important work throughout the years. He is in his 80s. He's like 83, I think. 83 or 84, sharp as a tack. And so in the text on page 81, he states that when we're talking about Ogun, we should study the Yoruba myth of Ogun as the record of the varied philosophizing of the Yoruba on the fantastic phenomena of wildfire, put to use of men for heating and for lighting, for cooking, for hunting, and for war, for metallurgical for metallurgical factory work and metal crafts. The personification of Ogun derives from early wildfires in the word for fire itself, just like what you see in ancient Egypt. And so all of these derivative meanings and associations are born out of the the effects of fire and what fire was used for. So you use fire to burn rocks and ores to make metals. You use it to cook. You can even use it in war. So like when you go into a community and village, you burn it. Or you can use it for farming in terms of slash and burn technique to make the land more fertile. And you'll see that all these associations are synthesized in the personification and the deity Ogun. And so you even find Ogun in terms of copper objects, Genu metal pots and vases in the ancient Egyptian language. And then you will see that, you know, Ogun, again, the Orisha of blacksmiths, among the Fon people is just known simply as Gun, which is one of the voodoo of blacksmiths. The Ham, the Jaba people of Nigeria, Kuno, the evil spirit who built the iron furnaces. Among the Hassa, the cognate is Makeri. So the M becomes an R sound. And Fon again, Gan, in meaning iron. And then in Arabic is Kuyun, or smiths, or Kayin. And then in Hebrew is Kayin, meaning cane. And so, you know, we can demonstrate that easily as well in terms of regular sound meaning correspondences between the Yoruba language and Semitic languages. But the native cognate for Ogun in Semitic is Chayin, meaning smiths or cane. So for y'all who don't understand cane, Cain in the Bible, or Chayin, is the personification of a blacksmith or metallurgist, a farmer or urbanized. You have also Tubal Cain. There's two Cains in the Bible. There's Tubal Cain and Cain. And Tubal Cain was the person who created the first city in the Bible. We know for a fact that one person can't create a city. It's a myth. It's a personification. It's an anthropomorphic representation of the guild of metallurgy, of blacksmiths, I mean. And so and then of course it's Cain, just Cain in the Bible itself. And remember that the word Abel comes from the word Habel, which is the same root as the word Hebrew. It has to deal with nomadic pastoralists. And so what the Genesis story is telling you is the conflict between nomadic pastoralists and urban, the people who develop cities and urban centers, and farmers, which have been going on for many, many years. And so that's another conversation for another time. And so just like how we discussed in the first video in terms of Yahweh being the personification of a volcano, so is Ogun. And so those of us familiar with Ogun's stories, you know, here's one that talks about Ogun as a volcano. It says, on the day Ogun was coming from the top of the mountain, it was with fire he covered himself. It was clothes of blood that he wore. And so in you see the citation there with Oduyoye and the Yoruba words that are translated here in English. And so when it talks about him being clothed in blood and it's a fire at the top of the mountain, he's a volcano. And so as I discussed in Alluja Volume 2, these are my words here. On top of the mountain, they posited a town of fire, symbolically named Ire, which is a biform of the Yoruba word that you is dealing with fire, and there's a biform in the word aro or aro, fire pot, which you find in Arabic uh, hara, to burn, in Hebrew heat, and afer and in Bari set on fire. And I have here on the right hand side, which I should have put in this paragraph, in Middle Egyptian, yerit, flame. And so I continue. Other myths state directly this fact, stating that he came to the world from a volcano as it was erupting, and brought with him the ability to forge weapons and tools. And so you have other myths that directly state this, and there's my citation there. And again, I discussed this in chapter 10 of Aluja Volume 2. For those of you who have it, y'all can review at your own leisure. And so, just like Yahweh is the personification of a volcano, and then, of course, it has all of those destructive properties that we mentioned earlier. And so now we discuss the goddess Sekhmet, because Sekhmet is also a personification of war and violence, and also of fire and the like. She is usually defined as the powerful one, because there's a root, or there's a word Sekhmet, meaning powerful and mighty. But this is a derivative meaning, and actually I believe it has a different root altogether. And I discussed that in Aluja Volume 2 as well. But the word Sekhmet derives from that word chem, meaning fire and to heat, that we mentioned earlier. And so the S is a prefix, and sometimes the M is reduplicated. So you have Sekhem, heat up, make warm. Chem, hot, warm day. Shemim. So remember that ch and sh interchange in Egyptian. So you have shemim, heat, to be hot, to become hot. A cognate in Chiluba is kama, drying, evaporating, kama kana, dry thoroughly. And then you have the root in Middle Egyptian kim, to be dry. And then in the Yoruba, especially in the Ijebu dialect, you have oguna, red hot charcoal from the fire. And so this is a personification of Sekhmet. Notice, one, that of course she has a anthropomorphic body, but her face is of a lioness. And notice the sun on top of her head. Now, Sekhmet is also associated with diseases, and this is going to become very important in just a little bit. But this is the female counterpart to the Sphinx. So, and note, and we argue that this variation was what became Shemesh, sun, in the Semitic languages, which was also a goddess, Shemesh. That's their sun god, Shemesh. But it comes from the same root here, Chem, Shem, meaning heat, to be hot, to become hot. It all comes from a root meaning fire. And so, of course, there are other aspects of this root, in terms of derivatives. So we have Sechem, to be terrible of, possessed of. And so she has a violent temper. She has a violent temperament, I should say, about her, which would be expected if the root from which her name derives from fire. And so we have him here, to force open. And so it's kind of, it can be used as a word for bullying. And so there's a text that really articulates the destructiveness of Sekhmet. And so it's called the myth of the destruction of humanity. There are several copies of this text. Some you can find in some of the Ramesses tombs, and others you can find like with Tutankhamun. There's a variation there. And so this is primarily a New Kingdom text. And so what's interesting about this text is that this is, again, it's the myth of the destruction of humanity. So this is the first text that I can think of where God tries to destroy humanity. So the god Ra. And the reason why is because the human beings were being very disrespectful to Ra because of his old age. And so Ra decided to teach humanity a lesson. So he sent Sekhmet in the form of the Eye of Ra, which is the sun, which is fire. But in this, it's in the form of pestilence. But it reads, "Then the god said before his majesty, let your eye pursue them," because Ra consulted the pantheon of deities, just like how Yahweh was part of a pantheon of deities, and gets counsel. Like there's dissertations written on this in regards to the Hebrews. So after consulting his council of deities of Necheru, then the god said before his majesty, in terms of Ra, let your eye pursue them. Remember, the eye of Ra is just the fire and the sun. Smiting them, talking about the human beings, according to your will, these evil conspirators. There is no eye better able to punish them for you. Let the eye go down in the shape of Hathor. So you can see they kind of interchange. Hathor and Sekhmet, they're one and the same here. And so Sekhmet was actually again a form of disease, because in African languages, the words for disease and pain are also the words for fire and to burn. So sickness and disease are associated with heat and fire. Coolness is associated with health. And I discussed this in Aluja Volume 1 as well, especially in the chapter on Ma'at, and then and especially in the chapter of Seneb, dealing with health. So when you say health, Seneb, there's also a word Seneb meaning cool and coolness. But the words for disease have to deal with heat. And so Sekhmet is known in West Africa, where she is known as Sakpata among the Fawn of Dahomey, Sikpon among the Ga, in going close to Ghana, and Sokpono, god of smallpox, among the Yoruba. So that's why, let's go back. When I mentioned, for those of you who are familiar, these are the persona, the priest of Sakpata. And they have these dots to represent smallpox and disease. And so this is a borrowing. This is not native to West Africa. Some group of people from Egypt or Sudan migrated into Nigeria and Benin and in Ghana, and brought with them, oops, let me go back, Sekhmet, which becomes Sakpata or Sokpono. And Sokpono is one of the Irun Male, the sacred beings in the earth, for which Rune also means to be sacred. And so notice that the word Arun means disease, which is related to Arin, anything very hot. Erun, dry season. So this is why I had y'all pay attention to the RN sequences that were also corresponded internally within the Yoruba language for GN and KN consonant sequences. So Ogun, a root coming meaning fire, has its internal counterpart as Arin, anything very hot. And they are part of this group of deities called the Irun Male. And so folk etymology tells you that this means the 400 deities or whatnot. So Irun Male is Irun, a word for sacred beings. The M in Irun Male is a place prefix, and Ale is a root for like ground or earth or like space, right? And so Modupe Oduyoye, in his chapter or article in the text African Origins of the Major World Religions, edited by Amin Saba Sakana, an author who we also interviewed on our channel. So you can look him up and check that interview out. A very, very important interview. So Sokpono is a disease. It is in Yoruba an Arun disease. Yoruba Arun shares the same root as Yoruba Irun, sacred beings, in Irun Male, sacred beings in the earth. The rune is a reflex of Afro-Asiatic root herum, from which Arabic derived the verb huruma, to be sacred. From the same root is derived the Hebrew noun herum, total destruction, the type that is required in a holy war. See Yoruba rune to destroy totally. Arun destroys as effectively as Harum. So disease, weakens and destroys the body. And then, of course, we have these holy wars with Harum. That's why you have Boko Haram. The word Boko and Boko Haram, the terrorist group in northern Nigeria, is them trying to pronounce the English word book. But haram comes from a word meaning to be prohibited. And so the phrase is they're trying to say Western books or Western ways, Western education is prohibited. But it's a play on words because haram has to deal with destruction. Haram has to deal with destruction. So what they're trying to say is to destroy the Western books, to destroy the Western ways. That's Boko Haram. And so how the dotted HRM sequence comes to mean sacred is because certain, like a harem is an isolated part of a house, a domain of a man's house who has multiple wives and concubines. And so when guests come over, they are prohibited from entering into that sacred space. It is that which is removed from everyone. So that's why when we're talking about the Irun Male, the sacred beings of the earth, these are because there's a belief that the smallpox disease was hidden in the dust of the earth. And so he goes into that into the text. So it's a very synthesized thing. And so, of course, demonstration beats conversation. So the KM, the H, which we transliterate for those of you who write in the Meta Nature online, it's a lowercase x m, but this is H with the loop under it, chem, with the ch sound. And so it's chem, destruction. And then Yoruba, to consume, to extirpate, destroy, annihilate, exterminate, extinct. Chem, stomp or similar. Irin, walk, stab, to tread. Chem, hot. Iron, anything very hot. Chem, pulverized ingredient in incense. Run, to break in pieces, chips, masticate, erun, crumbs. Chem, to be dry as dust, dust. Erun, the dry season. Chemet, to plan, to intend, to the thinker. Ronu, think, meditate, to be sorry, to be pensive. Chemwit, sacred images, sacred beings. Irum, sacred beings, and Irum Male. Chem, a relic. Chemu, sacred images. Aworan, image. So what you see here is the sound meaning correspondences, and we have the mappings of what sound goes to what. So when we see Sekhmet here, we know that this corresponds with the Irun, the sacred beings or whatnot, but is all derived from that that root meaning fire. Because remember that you know, the GN in Yoruba corresponds to all the HMs in Egyptian, as well as the SHM, because the H and sh interchange, and so does the sh and the H. I can't pronounce this type of H. But you're seeing that these are all variations of the same word. So the GN corresponds to RN within Yoruba, and the dotted HM and dotted HW. And so what this all is saying is that, you know, we have all these different groups who emerged and entered and came into Egypt. And so you have different forms of the same word. You have different varieties of the same deity. So Sekhmet, Ogun, Set in the form of Yahweh, and then of Yahweh, the Sphinx, they're all the same variations of the same deity. They're all Ogun. And so I showed this slide at the last one just to show that the RN sequence also corresponds with the dotted HM sequence. So all areas are covered. And so we see the same thing here, you know, there. And so when we're talking about, you know, Yahweh, that is just a title. It's a dialectical variation of the word Ogun. And so in summary, Semitic Yahweh is a borrowing from Egyptian. Yahweh is equal to the Egyptian god Seth, whose title is Yahi or Yahweh, which is a destructive deity also associated with Apophis or Apep. Yahi is combined with similar names such as Hu and He, flood, a major characteristic of a storm god. Therefore, for example, it should be in for example, instead of therefore, Yahi, the dark in the sky, because of storm clouds. Semitic Yahweh is cognate with Yoruba Ogun, who is also a personification of a volcano. So both Yahweh and Ogun are personifications of volcanoes. Ogun is cognate with Egyptian Sekhmet, and Sekhmet is an Irun Male, a sacred being of the earth, in her form as a disease. But she is also a sun deity in the form of the Eye of Ra and Hathor. And she is also personified amongst the Semites as the word for sun, which also is a deity, Shemesh. And so with that, I end my presentation. And so I will stop sharing my screen, and I'll take a few moments to answer, you know, any questions that you may have. And so thank each and every one of you for listening. And while you are at it, make sure that each and every one of you That is right. Hit the like button. And if you are new to this channel, please subscribe and hit the bell so that you will be notified when we have these conversations. And so let me look and see here. And I know I didn't, mention everybody at the beginning, so I wanted to kind of get into it. So, but peace and blessings to each and every one of you who have made yourself known in the chat. And I got to scroll through all these in the back end here. So let's go. Peace and blessings. Thank you, Brother Flag, for your comment. Let me see. So everything is everything says, I have an uneducated question. If Yahweh is borrowed from Kemet, let me see. Did the Hebrews borrow from the 42 confessions also? I don't think so, because they have more commandments, and the 42 confessions belongs to a different framework. And I hate when people say, like, thou should not kill. Like, anybody who has a society has a thou should not kill, thou should not steal. Like, those are just understood rules for living, peacefully amongst your neighbors. So, I'm not too keen on the idea that they necessarily stole, from the 42 negative confessions, because negative confession, and you're actually declaring to the ancestors, to the deities, and to the living community that you have not done any of the taboos of the society. So that's totally different than a God coming and commanding you, telling you that, thou shalt not do. It's a totally different framework. And let me see. Let me see. Trying to see if there's any questions. So in summation, the Hebrews went from being shepherds pre-exile to metallurgists, nation builders, agriculturists, and farmers post-exile. I don't even know if it's post-exile or not, but you got to remember that the quote-unquote Hebrews are just a bunch of Canaanites. They're a group of Canaanites who split. And, Canaanites aren't even really like a people per se, because it's a bunch of city states, just like how Greece is a bunch of city states. And so within that group, you had different groups. And so when some unknown shepherds came and settled in the community, they adopted the Canaanite language and the civilization. So you even read throughout the Bible that, these pastoralists adopted urbanization. They adopted kingship. They adopted all of that. And so they don't originate any of that. And so they look to other groups in terms of forming their own identity, while at the same time trying to shun and other groups for being who they are. Let me say, so if we were to say hot German, bolt, sweaty, is that to say that is a connotation to Sekhmet? No. And if for those of you who may be new to my channel, you got to understand, when I'm making these connections, I'm first verifying them linguistically. So that's why you saw the tables with the correspondences of the consonants. So this, one of the major tools that I use is linguistics, a historical comparative linguistics. So there's a method and there's a process for verifying that. For example, Ogun is Sekhmet, is Set, is Yahweh. I'm not simply talking about shared characteristics, because if it's shared characteristics, then anybody or any deity around the world who has those characteristics, I could say that these are a match. I'm not saying it in that way. I'm saying that the Egyptians and the Yoruba, They have an inherited vocabulary from a parent ancestor, and deities, fire deities that have manifested in these particular ways, in terms of modern Ogum, and in terms of Sekhmet, and in the god Set, right? And in that, the god Set, you have to watch the first video, was part of these nomadic pastoralists, part of their pantheon. And then the title for Seth is what became Yahweh in amongst the Hebrews. See, the reason why this conversation is so important is because there's so much debate on the meaning of Yahweh. It's such a mystery to them, because Yahweh is not one, is not a Canaanite or a Hebrew god, and it's not a Hebrew word, which is why they're having such difficulty. That's why you have to, in order to make a strong argument like this, you have to show and demonstrate regular sound meaning correspondences between two or more languages. They can't do that within Semitic and come to the conclusion. So when their inability to do that is why, when we're able to solve these problems easily when we're dealing with these African languages. And so there's a whole conversation that we had in part one that sets the framework for how all of this comes together. So remember, this is part two to a larger conversation, in a series of conversations. So let me scroll down. Let me see. Say ancient Zeus was black before white, right? No, I'm not trying to blackology everything. Zeus comes out of the minds of Indo-Europeans. There's a relationship between Semitic groups and Indo-European groups, like is a relationship with every other human being. All human beings come out of Africa. And by the time Greece comes into the picture, white people are already existent. So they make their gods in their own image. So Zeus was never black. And if he was, it was only in a symbolic color, because he is in part a sky deity in terms of a storm deity, and so it would be associated with a black cloud. But it is not dealing with like black people and race. There is none of that. So even when you see blackness in ancient Egypt, it has to deal with water. It has to deal with fertility and storms and rain, and which I will get deeper into in the upcoming book on the meaning of the word Kemet. He says, what would you say to the argument that Arabs and colonization was responsible for the West African connections to Kemet and the East? It would be impossible, because if the Arabs came into West Africa and brought these variations, we will be pronouncing it like Arabs. But you don't pronounce these like Arabs. And the fact that we have the internal correspondences in Europe, in Yoruba, in terms of the GN, the voice variation, KN, the D voice variation, and then RN, all three of these forms in related in terms of concepts, as we saw in the table, makes it impossible for one to do that. And then you would if it was a borrowing into West Africa, for example, via Arabs, we wouldn't be able to see these regular sound meaning correspondences that we do with Egyptian. So this is how we know that it is inherited. So this is why I do it the way that I do, to anticipate anybody who tries to make those arguments, because it's impossible to randomly come up with a strong series of correspondences, especially with two or more consonants involved in sequence. It's impossible. And so I set this up just for someone to try to make that argument, and they will not survive. This is the breakdown I misunderstood in initially. Okay. Kwame, pieces are you a linguist in African language or in all languages? just African languages. Peace, everybody. Peace. Black Africa power. Peace to you. So Sheffrin says, so Yahweh is from what language? Just getting here. My bad. Then you need to rewatch both series. I said it's from Egyptian. They borrowed it from the Egyptians. Sorry, who were the Ashkenazis? And Ashkenazis are a bunch of Europeans who adopted Judaism. Matter of fact, there's a whole Ashkenazi, like that's a place name in by Russia. Those are Europeans. Real talk. So, is stolen legacy is a fallacy. The earliest Greeks said their gods came from Egypt, Ethiopia. Peace King. No, it's not a fallacy at all. But some of their deities are homegrown, and I'll have to recommend some books on Proto-Indo-European religion, and you'll see that some of them are homegrown, but some of them come from Egypt. And so what we got to remember about ancient Egypt and the Semites, is that, again, as I stated in the conversation, the Semites, in pre-dynastic times, Egypt and the Levant were doing trade, and Egypt had colonies. And so I discussed this for those of you who have my text, Aluja Volume 2. It's this big, thick book here. The very last chapter, I'm citing, many of the modern relevant literature discussing this. The Egyptians had colonies already in the Levant. And then you had people from the Levant moving into Egypt. And so, Semitic speakers have always been in Egypt since before the first dynasty, primarily in the Delta area. So this is why, when they come in, the Semites, it's just like they would come into Egypt and they would find basically their own Chinatowns in the area, because there was so many of them. This is why you find so much Levant DNA when people do DNA studies on these especially late kingdom mummies. There was a lot of, they've been coming in since pre-dynastic times. And so, but the power differential is what's important here, because the power is the Egyptians that had the most influence on the Semitic speakers, to where they're borrowing a lot of customs, they're borrowing a lot of vocabulary, they're borrowing a lot of names. So that's why I cited that book by that Japanese Egyptologist who wrote about ancient Egyptian loan words or names into Northwest Semitic. So a lot of so-called Hebrew names are Egyptian. So like when I say, like even the word for lion, like, when I was a Hebrew Israelite, my name was Shaquat Ariat, which is, a quiet lion, right? Now, like if you say Tazariak, I don't know if the Aria part of his name, he would have to clarify that, but let's just assume if that was the case, it would be a borrowing into Semitic in terms of the word for lion, because it's borrowed from Egyptian. That's the Egyptian word for lion. And so, let me see. The cave of beasts in the western desert has the wa staff as the business end of a boved head. And then they even render the feet of the bovids at the bottom of the staff. All right. So I got the Black Hebrew saying, what? Our God is from Africans. You goddamn right. And that's exactly what I'm saying. And why it's even silly for them to even have the attitudes that they have. Yahweh, their primary deity, God, from which they get all their roots, is an Egyptian God that was picked up by nomads that used to roam in and out of the Delta, who adopted Seth as their deity. And it's because of the Semites adopting Seth as their deity, which is why Seth was vilified after a certain point, because they were associated with the Hyksos and all this other kind of stuff. You know, it's deep. There's more that can be written, you know, on this. But you have to understand the real world historical relationship between Egypt and the Levant, and the power dynamic between the two areas, you know, because like even in the time of Akhenaten and Amenhotep III and fourth, you know, these areas were colonies of the Egyptians. So even at the time of the Exodus, it doesn't even make any sense, because at the time the Exodus so-called start, they're running to Canaan, but Canaan was a colony of Egypt. It's still in Egyptian territory. Where were you going to go? And so, so yes, Yahweh is an Egyptian God, and they just have to deal with it. It is what it is. They're, you know, the Hebrews are pagans. They want to use the word pagan a lot in reference to other groups, but they are pagans. They worship a volcano storm god deity. They worship Ogun. Let me see. That's a fact. Poison and a couple of archaic Greek gods were not recognized by the Egyptian priesthood. Thank you, bro. I'm not trying to take from the topic. Indeed. All right. Differential equals distance measurement between 2 points. Y'all having a different conversation. Let me see. So Yahweh is not associated with El. Nope. And even El is a borrowing from ancient Egyptian in Proto-Semitic. I discussed that in the Luja Volume 2, and I have a video of that up as well. As this issue relates to polemical theology, you seem to be more in line with the notion of Hebrews usurping I am that I am and Yahweh from Kemet, and not the other way around in the heavenly book of the cow. First of all, the I am that I am has already been proven to be folk etymology. And you keep asking this question and not understanding what that is. Yahweh does not mean I am that I am. That's folk etymology. It's made up. They don't know what the name means because it's not in a Hebrew word. And so they try to define the word Yahweh with the closest words that made sense in their language. That's what folk etymologists do. So I would encourage you to read up on folk etymology, and then especially folk etymology in the Bible. And part of that discussion is going to be on the meaning of the word Yahweh. He says, what about Tata and Zombie? I'm not sure what you mean by that. And Hebrews got some explaining to do. Indeed. He says, I'm not equating the two. Let me see. All right, if that's it with the questions, I think I'm gonna end it. And so we'll be right at around 2 hours. So a respectable time. So I do appreciate each and every one of you for listening. And if y'all have any questions, of course, you can hit me up on my website at asarimhotep.com and go to the contact page. If you already have my email, then you have my email. Please consider, donating to the film, chinnaintofilm.com, if you have not. And so you can go to this link and find out more. And, we're just a little bit over $2,000 in terms of funds raised. So our goal is to have 5,000. And so I do appreciate each and every one of you who have donated thus far. And so, you can donate via this website. And let me see here. And you can, support as well by, purchasing some material. So you can You can get the book, Eluja Volume 2, at maduandelapress.com. You can also get towards a dictionary of Chicam in modern African languages at maduandelapress.com. You can also get my latest book that came out at the end of last year. I mentioned this before, Chiluba Maweja, Yoruba Orisha, an ancient Egyptian Ak, an exploratory etymological study from the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology. Also at maduandelapress.com, as well as, I can't even find the book now. Here we go. The latest from Dr. Muntu Wa Nzambi, Portrait of Human as God's Special Creation, from Dr. Chilima Lima Mukinge, out of the Democratic Republic of Congo, from African Creation Stories, Religious Beliefs, and Cultural Practices. So this is a very good book to get, and also available at maduandelapress.com. So with that said, y'all be safe this weekend. I'll probably do another show this coming Sunday. I don't know what it'll be just yet. But I think I'll be on Sonnetters on tomorrow sometime. So if y'all watch Sonnetter, I'll be, discussing this. So we'll probably make some more Hebrews mad on Sonnetter's program when I, reveal to them that Yahweh is Ogun and is an Egyptian God. And so with that said, y'all be easy and y'all have a blessed weekend. Peace.